Both of our speakers today are nationally renowned experts in their field and frequent contributors to Jurist's Forum section. Please join me in welcoming them. Now, on to the debate. It will begin with brief opening statements by both of our speakers. The bulk will be driven by questions posed by moderator Andrew Gilmore that have been generated by the Jurist student staffers. At the end, there will be a brief period for questions from the audience. Now, given how impassioned this debate can certainly become, we ask our audience to remain respectful to the speakers who donated their time to be with us today. I will now hand it over to JSSA Vice President and our moderator today, Andrew Gilmore.
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank you again for coming. We'll begin first with brief introductions by our speakers. Professor Adicott, we'll start with you. You should begin.
You want to?
You can speak.
Stand? Yeah. Okay. This is 5 minutes?
5 to 10.
5 or 10. Okay. Yeah, it's a great pleasure to be here today. Let me say, first of all, that the remarks I make are my own and they don't reflect the views of St. Mary's University School of Law. Okay, with that said, I guess as we start this discussion, because I don't really like to call it a debate, because in an open society, it's very important that we discuss and debate issues associated with our national security. And since 9/11, there's been a lot of changes in terms of law and policy. I think we're all aware of that. I think the basic platform that you have to understand in this war on terror, and there's a lot of terms that need to be defined, is that since 9/11, we've done things differently. If you accept the premise that we are in a state of war, and it's not a metaphor like the war on drugs or the war on poverty, then in my opinion, everything we've done as a government is pretty much legal. If you do not accept that premise that we're in a state of war, then pretty much everything we've done is highly illegal, very unconstitutional, violation of a lot of international treaties, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the law of war, and a variety of other international treaties, as I said, and also the U.S. Constitution. So it's about the premise. Again, if we're at war, we have the right to detain enemy combatants indefinitely until the war is over. If we're not at war, as you know, domestic criminal law would have to take hold. And if you see an individual terrorist, however you define that term, you simply can't apprehend that person and confine them without charging them with a crime. I know many of you are going on to your bar exam real soon. As you know, you have 48 hours to charge or bring them before the magistrate or release. We're holding people for years without charging them with a crime. You can't do that unless you're at war. So if you're at war, it's perfectly lawful. If you're not at war, it's perfectly illegal. Secondly, the use of force. We've been killing people since 9/11, since our campaign in Afghanistan following 9/11, even up to this day right now. The president, as you know, is using drones more than his predecessor to kill large numbers of individuals by surprise. And we've killed people with drones in Yemen and Sudan and Afghanistan and Pakistan. If you're at war, this is perfectly lawful. You can kill enemy combatants wherever you find them. The law of war prohibits you from killing enemy combatants, of course, if they surrender. If they put their hands up and surrender, that would be a violation of the law of war. However, it's perfectly lawful to kill them. If we're not at war, then the rules associated with domestic criminal law would apply. Even if you saw the top 10 person on the FBI most wanted list, a police officer couldn't pull out their gun and shoot them. That would be murder. As you know, they would have to be exhibiting deadly force, and you know all the rules associated with that. But if you're at war, it's perfectly lawful. So that's the premise. And that's really where the debate, I think, has to start. Are we at war or are we not at war? Because if we're at war, Guantanamo Bay is perfectly lawful. And oh, by the way, Bagram Air Force Base is the new Guantanamo Bay. The president's not detaining any new people in Guantanamo Bay, but he's detaining a lot of new people in another facility called Bagram Air Force Base in Afghanistan. And there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, and I can go on for a while, of enemy combatants that are in Bagram Air Force Base. So, are we at war or are we not at war? Who answers that question? Is it a pointy-headed law professor, such as myself? Is it a commentator on MSNBC? It is a writer for the New York Times? Is it a law student? No. Who has to answer that question? Well, in our government, we have three branches, and you look to those three branches that determine what the answer is. After 9/11, President Bush, as the commander-in-chief under Article 2, said, we're at war. In fact, on the very day, he said, this is war, and he wasn't using it in a metaphorical sense. As the commander-in-chief under the Constitution, the commander-in-chief is empowered to make war. They have the power as the commander-in-chief, as I said, under Article 2, and many of our commander-in-chiefs in our history have made war in the past. So the president said, we're at war. Does President Obama believe that this is a real war? Obviously, I don't have time to go into great detail, but you can read about it in my book or many of the large articles on our website. President Obama does believe this is a war. He doesn't say it as often or as forcefully as President Bush, obviously, but if you look at his latest pronouncement in January, he said, we're at war with Al-Qaeda. He also is using the law of war every day that he's in office to detain people in Guantanamo Bay and Bagram Air Force Base and to kill people. He's killed large numbers of human beings. Why? Because he believes we're at war. Some of the folks in Bagram Air Force Base, of course, have understood some of our Supreme Court decisions, and several of them, as you know or may not know, they've applied to the Federal District Court in Washington, D.C., saying we want the same habeas rights that our brothers are getting in Gitmo. And President Obama's lawyers responded to those lawsuits last year saying, no, you don't get habeas rights if you're in Bagram. If you're an Al-Qaeda member, you don't get habeas rights. I'm the commander-in-chief. I have the authority to detain you. We're at war, and you don't get habeas. That's been the response of the Obama administration. So they argue the fact that we're at war. He said that we're at war. He uses the law of war toolbox every day. So I think both executives believe this is a real war. What about our Congress? A lot of people say, well, Congress didn't declare war, therefore it's not a real war. You are not a student of American history or of the Constitution if that's your viewpoint, because of the almost 200 wars we've had in our glorious history, Congress has only declared war in 5 of those wars. By that logic, all the other 195 plus are illegal. What Congress does instead is they authorize war. The last time Congress declared war under Article 1 was World War II. We've had a lot of wars since World War II, Vietnam War, the Korean War, the Gulf War. So Congress authorized the President George Bush, to use the military as he saw fit. Authorization for use of military force, as you know, and it says against any nation, organization, or person responsible for 9/11. Now, a lot of us as law professors, we kind of scratched our heads and said, wow, Congress has never authorized the use of force against anything but another nation state. The law of war was written when one nation goes to war against another nation. How can they authorize the use of force against organizations or people? They did it anyway. Obviously, it's not an exact fit. The law of war, when it was the last major revisions, 1949, we've had some other revisions in the 70s, they didn't envision that you would have war against a group like Al-Qaeda, which is a virtual state, if you will. They don't have a little card at the UN. They're not a nation state. They're a non-state actor. But Congress authorized war-making force against those people. And then in 2006, Congress passed the Military Commissions Act. You can't have military commissions unless you're at war. Military commissions are only authorized under the law of war, under international law, unless you've been in a war or you are in a state of war. And in that Military Commissions Act, they told us who the enemy was. They said people that qualify for military commissions are Al-Qaeda, Taliban, and associated forces. A lot of people say, well, it's a Republican Congress, it doesn't matter. Of course, that's politics speaking, because the response to that would be, well, the Democrat Congress passed the 2009 Military Commissions Act. And they also identified Al-Qaeda as unlawful enemy belligerents. And therefore, again, you can't use military commissions unless you're dealing with enemy combatants, unless you're at war. So Congress clearly believes that we're at war. They've authorized the war, and they continue to act like we're at war.